for joining us today for our Helping Your MBTI Clients Explore Reported Type Accuracy and Determine Their Best Fit Type webinar, produced just for you, our valued ICON customer. My name is Kim Rivera, Associate Marketing Manager here at CPP, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today's webinar will run for approximately 30 minutes, and at the end of the presentation, Catherine will be answering your questions, so start thinking about what you may want to ask, and please submit them to me at any time using the question function in the webinar controls. Please note this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the email with link to the recording in the next few days. Now, I'm very happy to welcome our speaker, Catherine Rains. Catherine is a credentialed MBTI Master Practitioner. Catherine works with Fortune 500 companies, universities, and nonprofit organizations to develop and facilitate organizational developmental initiatives and team-building interventions. With over 25 years' experience as an assessment and organizational trainer, her expertise includes instructional design, stand-up training, program development, train-the-trainer sessions, and team-building strategies. So let's get started. Welcome, Catherine. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kim. So our agenda for the next 30 minutes is to talk about actually one of my favorite topics, which is how to help clients really buy into their type and make sure that they're not just taking the report at face value, but actually exploring what is their true type. Is the reported type something they really believe in? So we're going to talk about how to help clients explore the accuracy of their type. And I'm going to give you my go-to strategies for what I start with, as well as some questions you can ask clients to help them explore their own type to make sure it's accurate for them. And then again, at the end, we will leave about 8 minutes at the end to answer your questions. So the very first thing I always do when helping a client who's just got their reported type is to ask them to read the full page description from the Myers-Briggs booklet, the Introduction to Myers-Briggs Type booklet. But this is particularly important if they're confused about one letter. So for instance, if they're not sure if it's E or I, excuse me, I would have them read the full description of, let's say, ISTJ and then ESTJ. Now, what happens is they're going to like both descriptions more than likely because 3 of the letters they already agree with. But they're going to, one will hopefully sound more like them, which is what we're looking for. Now, years ago, I actually, as a young person, I was trained out of 2 of my letters, meaning 2 of my letters, my parents actually kind of unintentionally invalidated, so that I actually grew up thinking that my preferences were INFJ. So when I read the description of, INFJ and then ENFJ, that, back when I was doing this, I actually liked both of them because, I saw myself in both. But over time, as I grew and developed, a lot of the introverted characteristics that I saw in myself kind of went away with my own development. And when I read the descriptions again, it was very clear that ENF actually was ENFP because J and P was also one that I was confused with. But it became very clear over time. So it doesn't work immediately for everyone, but theoretically, one over time will sound more like you. So that's always the starting point. Then one of my very favorite things to do after that, let's say if someone doesn't know if they have an S preference or an N preference, I will ask them for examples of how they use each one. So, for instance, if someone said, how do you use your sensing? Or give me an example of when you use sensing, I would say, it's really important to use your sensing function. You need it in life. And I've worked really hard at developing it. I think being in the moment is really important. Paying attention to data and details is really important. And I really focus a lot of energy on getting it right and getting the details right. And I'm really working at it. So that's sensing. If I gave you the same thing for intuition, I would say, if I could brainstorm all day for a living, that would just be the ultimate. I just love to brainstorm. And by the way, that's actually what I get to do as an MBTI trainer. I brainstorm all day long and help people figure out the patterns in their own behavior and type. Can you see the difference between the two? The one that is not yours or your clients is generally the one where people say, You need to do it. It's important. I've worked at it. So what I'll do is I'll mirror back to the client how they actually said it. The one that they kind of just rolls off and they have more enthusiasm for, usually have more positive adjectives to describe it, generally is the one that belongs to them. Another favorite strategy is to ask them to go and live a day as if they had, let's say, an extroverted preference. And then the next day, I would say, I want you to live as an introverted preference. And the way I would do this is I would go to the Introduction to Myers-Briggs type, where we have full page descriptions, which is actually on, we have descriptions of just E and I, S and N, T and F, J and P on page 5 and 6. And I would have them read the description of extroversion just by itself. And then we would discuss what would it look like if I spent a whole day as an extroverted preference. Like what specific things would I actually be doing with that preference? And then I would ask them for the same examples of what would it look like if I lived a day as an introverted preference. And then I tell them I want them to do that. So they spend a full day as if one of those preferences is theirs in each day. And then I ask them to come back and see me. And the one where they had to focus on doing it all day, or the one that felt harder to them or took more energy, generally isn't theirs, obviously. So many times that's a real quick hit and a very good illustration for them on which one is their true preference. This one is entertaining for a lot of people, and they usually laugh when you ask them. You know, many times if someone is confused about a certain preference, it can be because early on they were cultured out of their preference by a well-meaning parent, or maybe a not well-meaning parent, but someone in their life of an authority figure where they were trying to conform or get validation from them. So for instance, in my family of origin, I grew up with a family of introverted people, mother, father, and sister. And so very early on, all of my enthusiasm was actually met with kind of like a little bit of discipline, like, kind of give me some space, don't like jump in my lap as soon as I get home. I was also kind of a little bit of a not a neat child according to my father. So at least not as neat as he is. So he would see my room and it was a little bit of disarray by his standards. And over time, I actually learned that in order to kind of get his approval, I had to keep my room very, very tidy. I also learned how to keep time, and as in time management, really sharp like he would do. I learned to use a day timer by the time I was 10 years old. So there were things that I just learned that, in order to get validation from my parents, I kind of alter my behavior because I wasn't necessarily getting kudos or, approval for the things I was doing. So think about the early examples from your clients, or ask them for examples of what was happening that might have been kind of like maybe discouraged in their behavior. Sometimes are indications of where you could have actually been trained out of your type, sometimes unintentionally. And I love this one. What do you do at work that you're very successful at, but you secretly wish you could delegate to someone else? Because many times, we as adults, we learn skills because they're important to do in our jobs. We all have to do all 8 preferences a lot. But that doesn't mean that, out of each one of those, 4-letter pairs, that sometimes we have learned skills that we're good at, but we don't necessarily like doing. Like, I am very good at doing budgeting. It doesn't mean I like doing it, though. I'm just very skilled at it because it's a job skill that I've had to learn. So that would be an example that I would give. Another way of saying this is, what would you do instead of doing these things you're good at if you had the time or were rewarded? And another way of saying it is, what activities do you perform at work that take up most of your energy? So what drains you? Now, if we're talking about the individual letters, so the 4 strategies I just gave you are good for any of the 4 pairs, but let's just talk and, isolate each one of the letters by themselves. So for extroversion, introversion, this one actually is more confusing than a lot of people think. In America, we socialize basically all Americans to have extroverted preferences. So a lot of introverted people grow up thinking that they're extroverted, but a lot of extroverted people actually are confused as well because they interpret being tired at the end of the day and needing kind of downtime away from people as a sign that they must be introverted, when you could just be a pooped extrovert, which is certainly my case. If I'm standing training all day, I'm just tired at the end of the day. It doesn't mean that I have introverted preferences. I just need to recharge my batteries like anyone else would. So one of the main qualifiers for E&I is actually around when you are in any kind of a decision-making situation, would you like to chat about it or talk it out first, or would you like to think about it first? So it's really about what do you do first. Do you want, so in any given situation, I would much rather sit down and talk to someone, and basically from my extroverted preferences, I want to talk it out so that basically I can sort my own thoughts out. Where introverted preferences actually want to think about it first and then talk about it. Both sides could talk about it at equal length, and both sides could also think about it at equal length. But it's a matter of which one would you want to lead with. What do you want to start with is generally your preference. Sensing intuition, I think a few strategies here. I usually ask my client who isn't sure of sensing intuition is to tell me about something, describe something. So tell me about your last vacation and listen for how they're answering it. A sensing preference tends to tell you kind of like in order, sequentially about what happened with a fair amount of detail. It can be a lot of detail or a little detail, but they're giving you specifics about the vacation. Whereas an intuition preference is kind of giving you a broad stroke. They'll say something like, the most meaningful part of my vacation, or what I enjoyed most, or they jump around in the story. You know, they'll tell you about what they did on Tuesday and then on Friday and then back on Monday. So it'll be jumpy. Another version of this, is what did you do last weekend? So what did you do during your weekend? Same thing. You know, are they going to tell you what they did Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday lunch, Saturday dinner, or are they telling you the highlights? So the thing I liked the best about my weekend is usually intuition. Sorry, my mouse is getting the best of me here. Or give me directions to someplace. So I'll ask for a very specific direction, like tell me how to get to the mall, and I'll see how they give me the description. You know, are they giving me a lot of landmarks, a lot of street names, how many stop signs, how many miles? Versus that sensing, intuition will give me kind of like, they'll still give me the directions, but they might not know the street name or the exit name because they've actually just never noticed, you know, what those are. So they're kind of giving you, like, you're going to go down 495 and you're going to take the third exit, but I'm not sure the name of it. You know, they'll say things like that because they haven't noticed all the details. And how do you like to learn a new job? Or think about when you were in college, what were the assignments that you liked the most? What were the tests, the exams that you liked the most? Sensing people tend to like multiple choice, true, false, things where there's a right and wrong answer. Intuition generally go for essays, things where they can use a little creativity and kind of talk them, you know, there's more than one answer, you know, for something. Another way you can help a client see it for themselves is notice how they're talking with you about anything. Sensing preferences tend to stay on topic in sequential order of what, you know, you had come to talk about, whereas intuition, you'll be talking about something and right in the middle of the conversation might say something like, and that reminds me, or they'll divert the conversation into something you weren't talking about because some fact triggered something new in their brain. So did you stay on track or not? Sometimes can help a client get to it. For thinking and feeling, one good strategy is to ask them about a situation where a colleague was doing something they didn't like they were working on a project and they didn't like how the colleague was doing it. How would they deal with that? Now, this changes sometimes with age and development, but with a younger person, and younger I mean, let's say 30 and younger, maybe even 40 and younger. It depends on, you know, how someone is developed, but generally when we're younger, a feeling preference will tend to kind of beat around the bush a little bit or sandwich it. They'll say things like, well, what I really love about how you're doing this project is this, but if you could do this a little differently, that would be great. And what I really like. So they'll sandwich too good in the middle of a bad. Or they'll kind of correct what that other person is doing for them because they're uncomfortable, you know, confronting, because maintaining the relationship is so important to them. Now, a thinking preference tends to just say it like it is. They'll just say, I need you to do this, or this is what I think is not working. You know, can we work on this together? But again, with age and development, both sides tend to move to the other side. So for instance, feeling preferences, I hear a lot of people who, you know, are well into adulthood say, well, I tend to, you know, actually be much more direct the older I get. And the thinking preferences will say, I'm much more diplomatic the older I get. You know, I'm much more careful about how I say it instead of just going in for the jugular and just saying it like it is. So it can change, you know, with age. How do you like to be appreciated on the job? So, and how often do you want to be appreciated on the job? So thinking preferences tend to respond with things like, I want you to appreciate what I'm doing at the end of something, meaning I've already accomplished something, and be very specific about this is what I liked about what you did. So doing it at the end or doing it a couple times during the project, but not that often, because the more often you kind of praise a thinking preference, the less credible it seems. Like you're actually kind of like giving compliments without much substance. On the feeling side, they would appreciate appreciation at many milestones along the project. So it could be, you know, 4 or 5 different touch points. And it's not that they need the validation so much, but it's a way of connecting. It's a way of, you know, having two people actually, they want to know they're on track, but it's also like, do you like me? You know, are we working well together? Are we harmonious together? So it's a way to get that kind of validation. And this is a really simple one, but you can ask both, you know, feeling, what, you know, think about in college, what were your favorite subjects, or high school? And again, thinking preferences tend to they like the more analytical kind of classes, you know, math, science, maybe debate, anywhere there's a lot of intellectual stimulation, where there's not a right and a wrong, where they can kind of get into analytical subjects many times. On the feeling side, they tend to go toward humanities, people kind of subjects like psychology, sociology. Those usually are their favorite topics. Judging and perceiving, I like to put people back into college, because in college, in a college situation, is when we more than likely did judging or perceiving more true to how our true preferences were. So I'll say, if you had a term paper with a 30-day deadline, but it only took 5 days to actually do the paper, when would you actually start the term paper? A judging preference tends to say, well, I started it like on the first day or the second or third day, and I got most of the paper done by the second week, and I turned it in maybe 3 or 4 days early. On the perceiving side, they'll also start it early, but starting early is very different. It's exploring all the options for where they can take the paper in terms of topics. And so they will continue exploring topics very close to when they actually have to write the paper. And they might have actually written a lot of it in their head. And then they'll end up writing it very close to the deadline. That usually delineates J&P quite well. So when did you start? What did starting look like? And when did you actually finish it? A perceiving preference will actually usually turn it in pretty close to the deadline, like on the day, even on the hour, is generally the perceiving style. And when you picked your major is also a really good indicator. Now, both J's and P's tend to pick their majors early, but J preferences, the definition of early is very different. They'll choose a major, let's say in their junior year in high school, maybe their senior year in high school, and they tend to stick with it. Meaning once they've chosen it, they're very reluctant to change that major unless it was obviously a very, very bad choice. Let's say they chose nursing and they got into the degree and they realized that they hate blood and they just failed biology. Then they might actually change the major. But in most cases, they would actually stick with even a major that they said was the wrong choice, and they would make it work. And usually they go into it. On the perceiving side, they also choose early because it's kind of, they feel shame, you know, because people are asking them, well, what are you going to major in? And they feel kind of bad if they don't have an answer for that. So they will choose a major, maybe even declare it, but they generally are not committed to the major. And they won't, if they had their druthers, they will not actually fully commit to the major until there's a firm deadline on the school's part. So if the school says you have to pick a major by the end of your sophomore year, that's when they'll actually firm the decision. But even then, it will not be a firm decision. They will be thinking to themselves, well, I took a class, let's say if they chose nursing, and it's the same situation, they don't like blood and they fail biology. They will look at all of the classes that they have been taking as electives, and let's say they really got turned on by their marketing class, they might actually ditch nursing for marketing and end up basically starting over, because a lot of their major credits now don't count. So you can tell perceiving by not only did they change majors, many times they'll change more than once, or they'll choose a double major so they have lots of options in terms of career choice later, or a double minor, or they'll do a lot of co-ops and internships. And it's all in an effort to explore their options, where again, judging tends to stick with one throughout their entire career, usually. There's always exceptions, but when a judging preference changes a major, they will change within 5 degrees of the original major. So if, again, for instance, if it was nursing, they will look at all of the credits that would be transferable and then choose something very close so they can retain a lot of their credits. So maybe they'll choose health sciences. So many times, just the major selection alone can help someone decide JMP, which is one of the more difficult ones, I think, for clients to choose, because we train everyone in our society, and we want you to look like you have J, because that's how our country is kind of formed. J is kind of our value system. So many times P preferences have a hard time identifying it because they behave in a J way, yet they're true underneath. The way they really function without maybe people watching is in a perceiving way. So those are the basic strategies, and we have about 8 minutes for some additional questions. Kim, do we have some questions?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I do have a set of questions. Earlier on, I think there was one who was curious to know if your dad was an ISTJ after sharing some of your childhood memories.
No, he actually preferred INFJ, and that is how I was socialized. I really thought that I had an INFJ preference until my 30s. And then at age 33, first I realized I actually had a P preference. So for a long time, I couldn't decide between. So at 33, I picked P. So it was INFP or ENFP. And then at age 47, I finally got that it was an ENFP. But it took me quite a few years of taking all the layers off before I got it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so we have a question. How do you deal with the people who have bias toward being an E, but they clearly are an I? Sometimes people interpret E as someone who likes people and I's who don't like people.
So E and I has really nothing to do with, whether you like people or not. Both E's and I's could like people, or they might not like people. It's about how you get energized and what you want to, basically, do you want to talk about or think it through? That's the main qualifier. So, not everything is described by type. So someone who doesn't like people, maybe they don't socialize as much, they don't want to interact with other people as much, but that isn't really, I preferences like people as much as E preferences. They just might want to hang out with 1 or 2 people as opposed to maybe having 5 or 6 people. So the circle is just going to be smaller. So in terms of how I handle it, it's how we handle any of the preferences that, if I can help someone understand that this is not about a good or a bad, this is just what I feel most comfortable doing. And it may not always be the most appropriate thing. So I know a lot of I preferences in particular that kind of train themselves to be very social so that they don't look antisocial to other people. But that's only because in some situations it's just appropriate to kind of come out of the box. Same thing for extroverted preferences, just the opposite. Sometimes extroverted preferences are perceived as kind of taking over, and being overbearing and being too social, like wanting to hear themselves talk all the time. At least that's the stereotypes. So just because you have an extroverted preference doesn't mean it's appropriate to talk. So sometimes, good type development means when to do your type and when not to do your type.
All right. What is your point of view on the idea of ambiverts, people who seem to be both E and I at different times?
What a great question. In fact, that's probably the number one question I get at certification when I train. The concept of, I would say that we all are ambiverts. I would say that we all do E, I, S, N, T, F, J, P. And with aging development, we're getting better and better at the 4 preferences that don't come as easy to us, to the point where some people will say, I do S and N equally, therefore I'm an ambivert. I would say that just like your right and your left hand, yes, you could actually learn to be ambidextrous and you be skilled in both. But theoretically, one is still the one that comes easy to you. So if with S and N, you could look very skilled. So for instance, J and P, I would say I'm pretty, if we're going to use the ambivert word, I would say I'm ambivert with J and P. But still, if I look at what comes easier, it is absolutely perceiving. But I put a lot of effort into doing J because that's just what is expected of me professionally and in many social situations too. So I do it, but that doesn't make me ambidextrous or an ambivert. It makes me able to use both appropriately, and that's what we call good type development. So in type language, we really don't go with the idea of ambivert, other than the idea that we're all ambiverts in terms of we're all doing both, but one is still the one that's easier, and that's what I'm trying to help a client tease out, which one is truly the easier one, so then you can shape more your life around the easy one. Put yourself consciously into more of those situations.
Okay, so we have Jeannie who says about 30% of any given MBTI group will decide that their best fit is different from their reported type. And this tends to be confusing for the participants, and then they want a new report with their best fit type. What do you think about that?
Actually, that is statistically accurate, Jeannie. So it's actually somewhere around 20 to 30% of any group that I ever train will have, usually it's one letter. So 75% of the group will agree with all 4 letters of the reported type. 25 to 30%, I've even had 50% of a group will have, usually it's one letter. It can be 2 letters, but more often one. And that's actually normal and natural, to have, because the reported type is so dependent on the mind setting that someone went into actually taking it. So if they were taking it at work, even if we give them good mind setting, they're still in kind of in a work mode. It is very possible for them to have, in a certain letter, let's say J and P or S and N, they took it from their work self as opposed to who they are underneath all the roles they play. And it's possible that one letter didn't come out correctly. So, part of the validation process is to give our participants the freedom to truly explore their type and to see and even question their type. I always think that if someone questions their type, I've done a good job. And if they are really thinking, oh, I don't know if it's J or P, I'm thinking I've actually helped them explore who they really are as opposed to taking face value what the report says. And again, 75%, the report is going to be completely accurate for them. But again, it's completely dependent on mind setting. So if the mind setting wasn't perfect, even if you did it perfectly, they didn't hear it that way or take it that way, it is very possible that a letter wouldn't come out accurately. And it's our job then, that's why, all the questions I just gave you is to help them explore for themselves and validate for themselves what their true type is. And then, we reprint the report with their true type. I consider that a natural, actually a healthy process of exploration.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze one more question in, and some of it may actually be similar to what you've just answered. How do you deal with the client that says they've taken the MBTI many times and they get different types each time they take it?
Oh, another good question. So the answer to that is that it is all dependent on mind setting. So what my question to the client is what was the mind setting or situation, or how did they tell you to take the assessment the first time you took it or other times you took it? And what was the mindset when you took it this time? And which one do you think is more accurate? And the thing is that our type has always been there from the time we were born. However, how you take the Myers-Briggs can change over time. So how you took it when you were 18 could be different than how you took it when you were 35 to 55. That is not an indication. That is not an indication that your type is changing. It's an indication that you're taking it differently with different mindsets. So I would need some time with the client to help them figure out who are they underneath all of these mindsets, and which one of those types is actually their true type, because they haven't changed type. They changed how they took the assessment. So we need to come up with their true mind setting so we can get a true type.
Okay, so unfortunately we have run out of time, but wanted to thank everyone for attending and asking so many questions. The recording will be shared out next week, so look for an email. And if you have not yet explored the Independent Consultant Resources website, which features content to deepen your knowledge and broaden your expertise, please be sure to visit people.cpp.com/icon-resources. And this page is where we will continue to add more resources, downloads, and more information that's designed for CPP icons in the next couple of months. So thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful day.